Good morning, everyone. Happy Friday morning. I hope you're all bright and sharp this early on a Friday morning. I had adjusted the meeting yesterday so that you guys wouldn't have to go into a waiting room. But unfortunately, that change didn't seem to take place today. So everyone went into meeting room again. If we have an issue like we had yesterday where a bunch of people join, so I have started the meeting and I admitted everyone that was in the waiting room. The unfortunate thing with that is if somebody comes into the meeting room between now and the end of the lecture, if I don't notice they're there, I won't admit them. So if by any chance you happen to notice that there's someone in the meeting room or if someone texts you to say that you can't or that they can't get into the meeting, maybe just let me know through the chat and I will let them in. So hopefully I will try and resolve this so that that you don't have to go into the meeting room. I know this is industrial waste, but just one thing I would like to mention about our topics lab that's at 12:10, starts at 12:10 this afternoon, is that everyone who's going to participate in the fieldwork must have completed that quiz. Anyone who's in that lab, if you've completed that quiz, can you raise your hand so I can see? Because I'm seeing no indication that any of you. Okay. Okay, so I need to take a look and see why I'm not being notified and I can't see that you've completed that quiz. But for anyone who hasn't done it by now, please go online and get it done try and get it done before 11 o'clock so that there's no delay in us getting out into the field. Okay. I see that we do actually now have other people in the waiting room. So so I just admitted 3 more people into the waiting room. The way to avoid this issue is for everybody to be online at 8:10. I will do my best to start right at 8:10. So if everybody is online at 8:10, we know that we won't have any issues with anyone being stuck in the waiting room while the lecture is taking place. If you just give me 1 second, there is a couple of administrative things that I need to do here. I'm just sending a private message to a couple of people, so I'll be back with you in just one second. Okay, so we're going to start with the first lecture for Unit 1. I'm just going to share my screen, and we do actually still have people coming into that waiting room. So if they're not in by now, it may take me some time to notice that they're actually sitting there. So just let me share my screen. Okay, I've shared my screen. Okay, so this is Unit 1 of industrial waste. Okay, essentially okay, hold on 1 second. Okay, so apparently there's some electronic captions in these slides, so I've had to come off the full screen view. So the overview for this lecture: introduction, course outline, instructor and students. We did that portion of it yesterday. So we're going to move ahead, and we're going to now look at the learning objectives of the industrial waste course, the key terms in waste management, the history of waste in Ontario, the hierarchy of waste management. Take a look at what some of the various waste legislation is, not only in Ontario, but Canada and in the US, various types of wastes, and the source of those wastes. So I'm just admitting some additional people into this. Okay, apparently not everyone can be like us and be up bright and early on a Friday morning. Okay, so basically that's the overview of today's lecture. So the learning objectives is to really identify the key legislation that applies to industrial waste. So that's that first line is a little bit of a misnomer, because we're actually going to look at key legislation that applies not only to industrial waste, but also to municipal solid waste, and how that impacts legislation like 3R's legislation. We're going to examine the sources and the types of industrial waste with a focus on selected industries. So what we're going to do in this course is we're going to look at a couple of selected industries, and we're going to target a couple of the larger industries that operate in Durham region. One of them being an electroplating facility, another being a cement manufacturing facility, and I believe there's a couple of others. So we're going to look at those facilities, and we're going to look at, what are the specific sources of waste. Okay, so if I could just ask everybody just to take a look at your microphone and just make sure that that you are actually all muted. That way we won't get any feedback. Okay, we're going to look at and identify the historical events that have led to the current system of industrial waste management, and also waste recycling in Ontario. We're going to identify some of the major companies and industries involved in the generation, transportation, treatment, and final disposal of industrial waste. We'll define key terms used for industrial waste management and take into consideration that the definition of waste varies between jurisdictions. Okay, so what is an industrial waste? So essentially an industrial waste is any waste that is produced by an industrial activity. Right. So when you look at commercial operations like commercial malls, where you look at residential waste coming from homes, those waste by definition are not industrial waste. Industrial waste has to be produced by an industrial activity. So it takes place in industrial plants. The definition of industrial waste excludes municipal solid waste and residential waste. It includes any material that is rendered useless, unwanted, residual during waste processes and/or operations. And if you look at that, if a material wasn't rendered useless or unwanted, facilities would reuse it in their operation. So these are materials that have came to the end of their useful life. In these industrial facilities, they have no way to reuse it in their operations, so it essentially becomes a waste, and they have to dispose of it. When you look at industrial waste, you have solid industrial waste, liquid industrial waste, and gaseous emissions. When you look at it at solid waste from industrial facilities, I mean, there's a wide gamut of solid waste, but common ones are waste as sludge from wastewater treatment facilities. Liquid waste can be anything from waste acids, waste caustic solutions, waste oils. They're all in industrial liquid waste, and they're liquid waste because they are in a liquid form. And we will take a look later at how a waste is defined as either a liquid or a solid waste, because there is an actual testing protocol that needs to be carried out to ensure that a waste is in fact solid before it's disposed of. And of course, other wastes are gaseous emissions. When you look at gaseous emissions from industrial facilities, of course, they are disposed of to the atmosphere. They're discharged usually through exhaust stacks directly, or they can either pass through treatment systems that will reduce contaminant levels in the waste streams, and then they're discharged through exhaust stacks to the atmosphere. The one thing that you always have to remember about gaseous emissions in industrial facilities, some facilities have very sophisticated and highly efficient treatment systems in place, but no system is 100% efficient. If you have a treatment system that's 99.9% efficient, that's about as high as you're going to get, but you still have that 0.1% of contaminants that remain in that gaseous airstream, and that gets discharged to the environment. We don't touch on it in industrial waste, but in some of the other courses, we look at it, and an industrial facility discharging a gaseous emission that contains any level of a contaminant must have an environmental compliance approval in order to discharge that waste. When you're looking at a solid and a liquid waste, industrial facilities do not require environmental compliance approvals to dispose of that waste, provided that they dispose of it through a licensed waste management system that does have an environmental compliance approval from the Ministry of the Environment. Okay, so key terms in waste management. So hazardous waste, waste that is designated such by regulatory agencies, either because it has elevated levels of hazardous chemicals or materials, because it exhibits a potentially dangerous characteristic, or because the material belongs to a general family of materials which have been deemed hazardous by regulatory agencies. So if you look in our major piece of hazardous waste legislation is Ontario Regulation 347. If you look at the beginning of Regulation 347, you will see a section there, I believe it's section 2, that is entitled Designation of Waste. And there's a whole series of waste in there that's designated. And an example of that is they designate any liquid that is hauled from an industrial facility as an industrial liquid waste. So because of that designation of an industrial liquid waste, a facility that generates any type of liquid material, regardless of whether it's hazardous or not, must dispose of it under our hazardous waste legislation. And as I said, the primary piece of legislation in Ontario is Regulation 347. Okay. Landfill, a modern engineered way to deposit waste into the ground and still protect the environment. Excuse me. So I really need to get this waiting room issue resolved, because it is actually quite distracting when I see it pop up that people are waiting to enter. But anyway, modern engineered landfills. One of the big issues that we have in Ontario as far as waste management right now is that I don't believe that there has actually been a landfill, a new landfill approved in Ontario probably in the last 20 years. There's been numerous attempts to get landfills approved, but they usually fail in the site siting process of the of getting a landfill approved. And that's essentially because communities do not want landfills in their community. They would rather see waste shipped to some distant landfill and have their waste disposed of there. If you look at the City of Toronto had a very large landfill, and actually it was outside their community as well. It was in North Pickering, and it was called the Beer Road landfill. Toronto knew for many years that Bear Road landfill was coming to the end of its life, and they made numerous efforts to try and get a new landfill sited and approved, with all of those efforts failing. So Bear Road reached its capacity. I'm not sure the exact year that was, but it was probably 20 years ago now. And at that point in time, the city of Toronto started trucking all their municipal solid waste to a landfill site in Michigan. That kept the residents of Toronto very happy. All the waste they generated was shipped not only out of their community and into a neighboring community, but actually out of the country into another country. And essentially what happened with that situation was eventually Michigan, they began to get fed up of accepting everybody else's waste, and they began to put restrictions on waste coming in from outside communities. And as a result of that, Toronto had to purchase one of the few remaining existing landfills, which is located just outside London, Ontario. That landfill is eventually going to reach its capacity again. So Toronto is going to have to look at what they're going to do for a landfill, right? So if we look at landfill municipal solid waste, a landfill that has been permitted by a regulatory agency to accept municipal solid waste, right? This type of landfilling must have properties and design features specific to this type of landfill that have been established by state or provincial regulatory agencies. Again, as I said, we have had, there have been no landfills that I'm aware of that have been recently approved in Ontario. Leachate. Leachate is a liquid which may be partly produced by decomposition of organic matter that has seeped through a landfill or compost pile and has accumulated bacteria and other possible harmful dissolved or suspended materials. If you ever look, if you ever have garbage in a bag that you're accumulating in your kitchen, and there's lots, especially if there's lots of, high liquid content material in there, by the time you take that garbage bag outside, you begin to see a small accumulation of liquid in the bottom of that bag. That is essentially leachate. Now picture that in a landfill, that is receiving, hundreds and hundreds of tons of that in a day. That leachate that is generated from the garbage itself, but not only the garbage itself, but any rain that falls on the landfill and percolates down through the material, it forms what is called leachate. That leachate generally drops to the bottom of the landfill where it's collected and passed through some form of treatment system, and from there is disposed of. Okay. Okay, Resource Conservation and Recovery Act. This was probably one of the main key legislations that kind of kicked off the modern waste legislative regime. RCRA, which is the acronym for the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, was enacted by Congress, the US Congress, in 1976. Its primary goal was to protect human health and the environment from potential hazards of waste disposal, to conserve energy and natural resources, to reduce the amount of waste generated, and to ensure that wastes are managed in an environmentally sound manner. Prior to RCRA coming into place in the US and also in Canada, there was very little control over where municipal or industrial hazardous wastes were disposed of. I actually deal with three very old industrial facilities, and on the property of those facilities are the old municipal waste dumps that were used for many years back in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s. And the unfortunate thing about that is, with these old historical landfills, is there was no separation of industrial waste from municipal solid waste, so everything went in there. So when we do sampling around these old historical waste dump, we find all kinds of contaminants in the groundwater around them, because they were also built without consideration for any leachate that would be developed from the material. a classic example of that, if you want to see this, is if any of you know where the old Robinson Lang Tannery is in South Oshawa. There's a trail system that goes through the old Robinson Lang Tannery. About 5 or 6 years ago, they actually fenced off the tannery, the old tannery grounds from the walkway. So now you can only stay on the walkway, on the paved walkway. And the reason for that was that the tannery, it was used as the tannery's landfill. So if you walk through there and if you can see any trees that happen to blow over, look at the waste that comes up with the soil. So essentially, the whole Robinson Lang Tannery, which lies just west of Simcoe Street and south of Wolf Street in Oshawa, essentially the whole area is an old landfill site. A special waste is any waste that requires special handling. Special waste is non-hazardous waste, generally from an industrial generator, and must be profiled to ensure that it does not contain elevated levels of potentially hazardous chemicals or materials. So these special wastes are just wastes that have been designated. They're generally not hazardous. And if they are profiled and shown to meet these the designation of a special waste, they can usually be disposed of without going through the normal waste management processes. Okay, solid waste, regular garbage from non-industrial sources that can come from residential homes, restaurants, retail centers, and office buildings. Transfer station, a facility that consists of a large pad where residential and commercial collection vehicles empty the contents of the trucks. Other machinery, for example, bulldozers, is then used to push the garbage into long-haul trailers for transport to disposal facilities. Classic example in this area of a transfer station is the Miller Waste transfer station down on Wentworth Street in Oshawa. Smaller trucks, usually the garbage trucks that pick up garbage on residential streets, as well as homeowners with small trailers can go there, essentially pull into a large building. Everything gets dumped onto the floor. It gets picked up by a bulldozer and then gets packed into larger tractor trailer trucks, and then those trucks haul the garbage to their final destination, whether that be a landfill site somewhere either in Ontario or the US, or to one of the waste energy from waste facilities that we do have in Ontario now. Okay, waste streams. Waste streams are specific type of waste found in customers' disposal, right? So these waste streams can be trash, which is just your regular garbage, cardboard, aluminum, metal, or a more broader definition of a disposal type. So example, municipal solid waste, C&D, which stands for construction and demolition, and hazardous waste. So if you look at regular garbage that comes from a home, there are various waste streams there. We have our organic waste, we have our general garbage that cannot be recycled, we have our newspapers, our magazines, our cardboard, we have our metal cans, we have plastic containers, all of which can be source separated and recycled, but they are all well-defined waste streams. Source separation, a system of segregating various waste streams at the point of generation to make recycling simpler, more efficient, or cost-effective in certain locations. For those of us, who live in a residence and we're putting our garbage out every week, we are participating in source separation every time we take our newspapers and place them in the blue bin, take our organic waste and put them in the green bin, and then put the rest of our garbage into a black paper bag, or sorry, a black plastic bag. If that source separation wasn't done at the point of generation, which is the residences, it will become horribly expensive for the municipalities to try and separate all that material out of a single stream. They would have to construct large facilities with machinery and people to actually pull this material from the various streams. So source separation is a very important part of the waste management system. Waste reduction or minimization, recycling and other efforts to reduce the amount of waste going into the waste stream by redesigning products or patterns of production or consumption. Recycling is I mean, we all know what recycling is. It's when we take our newspaper and we put it in the blue bins. But redesigning redesigning of products or patterns or production, that by itself is not necessary. That's a waste reduction, but it's certainly not. It's not recycling. And those are things that are usually undertaken at the manufacturing level and at the product design level. Waste diversion, the act of preventing waste from being disposed into landfills and incinerators. So our Blue Box recycling program is a classic example of waste diversion. Sustainability, meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. I believe that our generation has done very poorly at sustainability. We became a generation where, you know, we generate so much waste without really too much consideration to our future generations and how are they going to meet their needs. But that is changing. We are moving towards a more sustainable environment. And end users are the consumer of products for the purpose of recycling, excluding products for reuse or combustion for energy recovery. So we are an end user. Every time we go to the retail store and we buy ourselves a new television and bring it home, we are the end user of that product. Okay, composting, biological decomposition of solid organic materials by bacteria, fungi, and other organisms into a soil-like product. Durham region does have a composting program. We take all of our organic materials, or theoretically, we're supposed to take all of our organic materials. We place them into biodegradable bags. We place them into a green bin. A truck picks up the green bin contents and takes them to one of the region's composting facilities. One of them is located in Pickering, on Clements Road in Pickering, and there is another one located in Clarendon. So all the organic material from our kitchen, all the yard waste that we generate is theoretically supposed to be taken to these composting facilities, composted into soil-like material, and reused either at the residential level by people putting it on their gardens, or on larger scale projects for landscaping of larger areas. A big area for the reuse of composting materials from these facilities is when we see highway construction and they're rebuilding the side of the highways. They will use compost from these composting facilities as the top dressing, so that vegetation will grow on the banks. Producer responsibility, a system in which a producer of products or services takes responsibility for the waste that results from the products or services marketed by reducing materials used in production, making repairable or recyclable goods, and or reducing packaging. So producer responsibility, but there's been a lot of talk of producer responsibility in the last months, if not couple of years. Our system has always been based on producer responsibility, but it's never been 100% effective to make the producer responsible. I actually saw a figure from the provincial government that municipalities in Ontario cost them approximately $158 million a year to operate the recycling facilities. Under a true producer responsibility, the producer of all that recyclable material will carry the cost of the recycling systems that are in place. If you can stop and imagine I mean, we purchase a lot of things for our business, and I have purchased some things that you know, they're not much bigger than a, you know, a 200 ml jar, and they came in a box, you know, that you could package, you know, a couple of sheets of 8 by 11 paper. If the producer of that cardboard was or product was responsible for the recycling and paid 100% of the cost of recycling that box, you can bet that they would pretty quickly reduce the amount of packaging that they're using to ship those things. Okay, pollution. That's the contamination of soil, water, or the atmosphere by the discharge of waste or other offensive materials. And we do always have to remember when we talk about pollution, when industrial facilities discharge their air emissions to the atmosphere, they are essentially polluting the atmosphere. They are allowed to do it if under an environmental compliance approval, but that compliance approval ensures that the pollution that they're creating is within acceptable limits and does not pose a hazard to the general population. And of course, resource recovery is the extraction and utilization of materials and energy from wastes. Okay, waste to energy plant, a facility that uses solid wastes, processed or raw, to produce energy. Waste to energy plants include incinerators that produce steam for district heating or industrial use, or that generate electricity. They also include facilities that convert landfill gas to electricity. Incinerators in Ontario were very similar to landfills. They were very, very difficult to get approved. And in fact, there were no waste incinerators approved in Ontario for many years. But the regulatory regime is changing. And Durham Region is a classic example of a new high-tech waste to energy facility in the Covanta facility located in Clarington. The Covanta facility, it accepts waste from Durham Region and York Region, and it takes that waste, processes it through an incinerator, and the heat generated from that incineration process is used to generate electricity, which is then fed back into the electrical grid, and then is used by households in Ontario. The Covanta facility in Clarington is quite controversial with the residents of Clarington. It's like landfills. No one wants an incinerator in their backyard. It is a high-tech incinerator. It is highly regulated by the Ministry of the Environment. But as I just explained, there are still air emissions that come from that incinerator. So there is concern in the public. The way I look at it is that Durham Region, we are dealing with the waste that we generate in our own backyard. Unfortunately for the people of Clarington, our backyard happened to be centered in their municipality. But from a personal perspective, if it was regulated that municipalities have to deal with their waste in their own backyard, we would see more waste to energy incinerators approved and put into production in Ontario. So Covanta and Durham Region, that is a classic example. Another example of waste energy plant is in Peel Region. It's called the Emerald Waste Energy Plant. It takes waste generated in Peel Region, incinerates it, and uses that waste to generate steam and electricity, and is supplied to industrial facilities surrounding the plant. We talked briefly about landfills generating leachate. As waste composes, it also generates methane. In years gone by, methane was essentially just allowed to vent to the atmosphere. There was no controls on methane emissions. with the global warming issues that that we're facing, all I shouldn't say all, but a large majority of closed landfill facilities, and also some operating landfill facilities, they collect the methane that's generated and they burn that at the landfill, and it is used to generate electricity. So in a modern facility, the leachate is being treated, and the methane off gas, it's being collected, and as opposed to just discharging it into the atmosphere, it is being reused to generate electricity. The definition of sludge: the watery biosolids removed from wastewater during treatment. The one thing I would like to add there, in this definition, they're saying watery biosolids. Biosolids generally refers to the sludge that is generated from municipal wastewater treatment facilities. So it's sludge that's the end product of the process of treating sanitary waste. So essentially waste that comes from residential homes, but also wastewater that comes from industrial treatment plant. But the definition of sludge should also include sludge that's generated from industrial wastewater treatment facilities, because industrial wastewater treatment facilities cannot just discharge their wastewater to the municipal sewer system. There are limits to the contaminants that they are allowed to discharge to the municipal sewer system. And in order to meet those limits, many industrial plants have to install wastewater treatment systems to remove those materials, and that usually results in a sludge being generated. Particulate, the small particles which make smoke visible in the air. All gases are clear in small quantities, like an exhaust gas would contain. If smoke is visible, it is due to particulate. I don't know if you're driving down the road in the middle of January and it's very cold out, and you see all these industrial plants and there's white smoke belching from all their stacks and their cooling towers. You're actually not seeing smoke. What you're seeing is water vapor, and it's more prevalent in the winter, because the cold dry air cannot absorb the vapor, so we see it as a visible vapor plume. Usually if you see smoke that contains particulate, it is usually discolored in some way, shape, or form. It can be orange, light brown, black, but if you see smoke coming from an industrial facility that is discolored, it is generally due to particulate matter. Ontario waste history. Back in the 1960s, soft drink brand owners introduced soft drinks in non-refillable cans, claiming they were safer and more convenient for customers because they would not break. I'm pretty sure I'm the only one on this lecture that remembers this, but we actually used to go buy pop from stores in a glass bottle, and when we paid for the pop, there was actually a 5-cent deposit on that bottle. When we went back to get our next bottle of pop, we give them that bottle, and we wouldn't have to pay the 5-cent deposit on the next one. So it was, it was a classic recycling facility. The majority of the bottles went back to the manufacturer. They were cleaned, and they were reused. But that obviously created costs for soft drink brand owners. They had to manage those systems of returning the bottles and cleaning them. But they also were making the claim that they were safer, more convenient, because they would not break. Obviously, if you drop a glass bottle, it breaks, right? So they started to move towards aluminum cans, and then from aluminum cans to plastic bottles. But that new trend in packaging resulted in a lot more waste, and waste management became a top priority for the Ministry of the Environment. And our Ministry of the Environment was established in 1971. But you can imagine just the sheer volume of soft drinks that were produced and sold back in the 60s, that all of a sudden were changed to non-refillable containers. There was no recycling system in place for those containers. They all ended up in landfill. So you can imagine the the excess stress on landfills from this added waste stream. But environmental groups did begin to pressure the government for a deposit return refillable system to protect the environment by reducing litter and to promote local bottling. MOE responded by amending the Environmental Protection Act to require the phase out of non-refillable containers over 5 years, beginning in July 1977. So essentially, they had recognized that the use of non-refillable containers was a big issue, and they passed legislation that would require the manufacturers to go back to a return and refillable packaging system, right? By the early 1980s, Ontario faced a looming crisis in landfill capacity. The number of refillables on the market continued to decrease as the number of non-refillable containers increased, right? So we were still facing a landfill capacity crisis, but manufacturers were beginning to go back to non-refillable containers. A number of companies, in response to that early legislation, a number of companies joined together to form the Recycling Support Council, which offered to contribute $1 million to the province to launch a publicly funded curbside system if the soft drink regulations were changed. So that model was supported at the time by a few environmental groups, but most opposed it and continued to advocate for a deposit return system. So essentially, the soft drink manufacturers, they were offering to pay to have a publicly funded curbside system put into place to recycle their containers, as opposed to going back to the refillable system. But environmental groups, and rightfully so, I mean, they recognized that at the time that still was going to generate significant waste streams. In the mid-1980s, the provincial government made Regulation 340 and Regulation 347 to promote recycling while trying to ensure that refillable soft drink containers would continue to be sold. Those regulations initially require soft drink distributors and brand owners to bottle only 40% of soft drinks in refillable containers. The remainder could be bottled in any recyclable container, but there was also a requirement that 50% of those containers would be recycled by December of 1988. In order to achieve this, many suggested that curbside recycling programs were needed. So it was back in the mid-1980s where we first started talking about curbside recycling programs, but governments got a big pushback from the soft drink manufacturers on this requirement to bottle and refillable containers. And there are some case studies online, and if you go look at them, many soft drink manufacturers, they started to indicate if this legislation came into place in Ontario, that they would shut down production facilities. They would lay people off, and this was just in the time where we'd undergone a major recession in Ontario. So the provincial and the federal government, they were very highly attuned to any potential for job losses and industrial closures. So that was what industry threw out there in response to this legislation, that, you know, if it took effect, they would start to close facilities. So in response to all this, the Ontario Soft Drink Association established the Ontario Multi-Materials Recycling Incorporated. It was an industry-funded organization, and it was formed in 1986. OMRI initially promised $1.5 million in funding to develop a blue box system. But I mean, $1.5 million is not a lot of money to develop a system of that scale in the province of Ontario. During the late 1980s and 1990s, the Ontario government introduced new policy programs aimed at waste diversion. The Ministry of the Environment launched the Waste Reduction Action Plan in 1991. And in 1994, the Ministry of the Environment. These slides are still referring to MOE as the Ministry of the Environment. When we changed governments from Liberal government to Conservative government about 3.5 years ago, the name was changed to Ministry of the Environment, Conservation and Parks. So the correct acronym for the ministry is now MECP. So I'll probably go back into these slides and I'll change these slides to reflect the correct acronym. So the 3R regulations were introduced in '94, and they were intended to be an integral means of achieving the objectives of the Waste Reduction Action Plan. The Waste Diversion Act 2002 became law on June 7, 2002, and it was enacted in order to promote the reduction, reuse, and recycling of waste, and to provide for the development, implementation, and operation of waste diversion programs. In late 2016, Ontario proclaimed the Waste-Free Ontario Act, comprising the Resource Recovery and Circular Economy Act and the Waste Diversion Transition Act. So you can see there's been an extensive history of the formulation of waste regulations in Ontario, and as the formulations of those regulations have progressed, the degree of waste diversion has progressed along with it. So the ultimate goal is for a waste-free Ontario, or a waste-free country where there is no waste generated, that everything that we do generate as an excess material is in some way, shape, or form recovered and or reduced. Okay, so we're going to go to the types of waste. A solid waste is any unwanted substances or materials used and then discarded by society. These include urban wastes, industrial wastes, agricultural wastes, biomedical wastes, and radioactive wastes. And when we get into industrial waste, we're going to see that there is a whole series of individual wastes that fall under the classification of industrial waste. Liquid waste are waste, typically waste from washing, flushing, or manufacturing processes of industries. And a liquid waste, a very brief explanation of a liquid waste, is any waste that will not retain its form if it's placed into a pile. There is an actual a test method for doing that under Regulation 347, because as I had described earlier, if a waste generated from an industrial facility in Ontario, if it's not hazardous, it still must be disposed of under Regulation 347 if it does not meet the requirement of a solid waste. And obviously there's expense involved with that, because they're paying the same fees as they would pay to dispose of hazardous waste. Gaseous waste released into the environment in the form of gases from automobiles, factories, or burning of fossil fuels like petroleum, causing smog and acid rain. We could also throw into that slide greenhouse gases. Automobiles are a major source of greenhouse gases. One thing that I did point out to the environmental topics course yesterday was that gasoline, or petrol as they call it in Europe, is now for the first time completely lead-free. Gases from automobiles were a significant source of lead pollution in most countries of the world. Sources of waste. Waste can be broadly classified into 4 types: industrial waste created in factories and industries, commercial waste produced in schools, college, shops, and offices, domestic waste, and agricultural waste. Okay, interestingly, I don't see municipal waste in there, but well, actually it would fall under domestic waste, so it is there. So there are 4 broad categories of waste. Okay, it's 9 o'clock. We are going to take a 10-minute break so I can give my throat a bit of a break, and then we will come back at 9:10 and we'll wrap this up. Okay. All right. Thank you. Okay, let's get going again. It's 9:10. So one of the issues that I am finding with using Zoom is that when I'm sharing my screen, I'm not getting any clear indication if someone puts a message in the chat or if someone raises their hand. So I will start off by just asking if anybody has any questions. Can you either just raise your hand and or put it in the chat, and we'll answer those questions before we proceed. So, any questions from anyone? Okay, Omar, would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question? Okay, I see your question in the chat, and it's essentially the question we got a couple of times yesterday is where can I find the recordings from our lectures? There is a I did record the lecture yesterday, and I'm recording the one today. There is a process that we have to go through in order to make those available to you guys. I did actually put the two from yesterday into a private YouTube channel, but the ones from today and moving forward are going to be stored on the Durham College iCloud system. I will figure out today how you guys access that and how you're able to view it. It's just not as simple as it was last year, where we could just post it as the instructor directly to DC Connect. So I will make sure that you all know by next week how you're able to access those recordings. Okay, so I'm going to go back to sharing my screen. Okay, we're still on sources of waste. Construction or demolition waste. Construction and demolition projects do actually generate huge quantities of waste material. When we're looking at demolition waste, they generate lots of concrete debris, wood, roofing shingles. On the construction side of it, they do generate smaller quantities of concrete and wood, but they also generate lots of packaging material. The goods that are being used for construction come in. So construction or demolition waste is actually a fairly significant waste stream in terms of size. Commercial waste, industries and commercial industries and automobiles, waste is generated daily on a large scale from commercial enterprises. Stop and think about the Oshawa Centre Mall. Every day that the Oshawa Centre generates all the packaging that the goods for all those individual stores comes in. They generate the waste from the food court. They generate any waste that shoppers throw into the waste bin. So commercial waste, especially from large commercial enterprises like the Oshawa Centre, they're significant in volume too. But also with commercial waste, you actually have the smaller stores and office buildings. They're all defined as commercial properties. Okay, mining. mining has the potential to disturb the physical, chemical, and biological features of the land and the atmosphere. Overburdening materials, mine tailings, the waste left after extracting the ore from the rock, harmful gases released by blasting and from metal separation are all released. If any of you have ever had the opportunity to go up through some of our larger mining areas like Sudbury, you will see massive piles of mine tailings, which is essentially the soil and rock that's left over after the material of value has been extracted. Radioactive waste, nuclear reactors, mining of radioactive substances and atomic explosions all create radioactive waste. Thankfully, we haven't had any atomic explosions in the last several decades, but nuclear reactors, and we have the two largest nuclear reactors in Ontario, in Durham region, with them being Pickering and Darlington. They do generate radioactive waste, and there's always lots of discussion over what is going to be done with the radioactive material that's generated from those nuclear generators. As a point of interest, you might want to take a look at some of the information that's out there on the one of the latest proposals, which is to ship the nuclear waste from the reactors to a site up on Lake Huron, and to essentially bury it in chambers. I believe they're going to be several miles below ground surface. But again, there's a lot of pushback from local residences in an effort to try and stop that waste disposal site from coming to fruition. Electronic wastes, DVDs, music players, TVs, telephones, computers, vacuum cleaners, and all other electrical stuff at your home, which are of no more use. Back in the day, you know, we would buy a television and we would have that television for 10-15 years, and it would break down, and we would call the television repairman, and he would come in and he would fix it, and off we would go for another 4 or 5 years. Now we seem to have all these electronics that have a lifespan of maybe 5 or 6 years. When they break down, there is no TV repairman to call, so we generally just dispose of that. These type of wastes are also called e-wastes, e-scrap, or waste electrical and electronic equipment. Some e-waste, like TVs and even computers, contain materials like lead, mercury, and cadmium, which are harmful to humans in the environment. But not only are they harmful to humans in the environment, but they also have value if they can be recovered. So there are facilities out there that does do some recovery of valuable materials from e-waste. And of course, other valuable materials that can be in e-waste are silver and small quantities of gold. So there is some facilities that will try to recover that material. Okay. So we still actually have people coming into the waiting room. So I really do need to learn how to resolve that. This is a chart essentially of waste prevention, waste treatment, and aftercare methods, right? So in waste prevention, you have compulsory measures. So the compulsory measures are, you know, legislation and laws that are passed either by the provincial or the federal government. You know, a classic example at the provincial level is, you know, our 3 Rs legislation and our regulation 347. Federal government, they regulate in some areas of waste. You know, they have some regulation that apply to PCB wastes, but federal legislation usually comes into effect when waste materials are crossing either provincial or international borders. There are obviously also industrial standards and voluntary measures. Most industrial sectors belong to, and they have formed industry groups. So as an example of that, we have some large automotive parts manufacturing facilities in Durham region that feed into General Motors. They are all members of the Automotive Parts Manufacturers Association, or APMA. Those type of organizations will put out, they'll develop voluntary measures and industry standards for their members to follow to prevent and minimize waste, cleaner production methods, and environmental management systems. Environmental management systems usually have targets within them, and many of those targets focus on the minimization of waste, both solid, liquid, and waste being discharged to the atmosphere. And there's also responsible care and life cycle assessment. Life cycle assessment takes a look at the environmental impact of a good right from the very start of its manufacture through transportation, sale, disposal, and all the transportation that takes place associated with that. Waste treatment, end of pipe technologies, right? Recycling, thermal treatment, which includes incineration, gasification, and pyrolysis, biological treatment, composting and biogas production, physiochemical treatment, and landfilling. So we will take a look at more of these, and or we will take a look at these in more detail as we progress through the course. Aftercare of wastes, that usually involves monitoring, right? And it's monitoring of closed landfills, and it's monitoring of contaminated sites. All closed landfills, generally speaking, depending on the age of them, but most closed landfills have monitoring programs that are put in place and approved by the Ministry of the Environment, so that they can be monitored for leachate generation, for impact to groundwater, and for collection of gases that are being produced. If we just speak about aftercare for a second, if any of you are interested, and you go take a drive down to Burn Street in Whitby, just west of Hopkins. If you go just west of Hopkins, there's a large soccer field there, which is used by the local soccer groups. Those soccer fields are actually built on one of Whitby's old historical landfill sites. And if you look around there, you'll see all kinds of monitoring wells. But more importantly, if you look at the site of that, you'll see a small building that's been constructed there with a tall stack on it. And that's because when that landfill was closed, there was no monitoring being done on it, and methane gas was actually beginning to seep into the buildings that are located immediately to the east of that landfill. So the town of Whitby had to put in place control systems to control the methane, but also monitoring systems to monitor the migration of leachate from that site. So it's a good example of an old historical municipal landfill system. We actually have another one in Whitby, which is located within the Lind Creek Valley, and there are several in Oshawa, one at Ritson Road and north of Adelaide. And historically, you used to see these old municipal landfills in creek valleys and very close to creeks, because they would use the waste material to fill the creek valleys. It was a good place for them. They didn't have to excavate these areas to put the waste. They would just dump it into the creek valleys. So waste management hierarchy, it's a tool used in the evaluation process. It's used to protect the environment alongside resource and energy consumption, from most favorable to least favorable actions. So that really is the definition of a hierarchy. It's put into steps where most favorable is at one end and least favorable is at the other. And within those hierarchies, there's actions to reduce and manage wastes, maximum practical benefit from products, and to generate and minimum amount of waste, help prevent emissions of greenhouse gases, reduce pollutants, save energy, conserve resources, create jobs, stimulate the development of green technologies. So this next slide is actually one of the busiest slides I've seen, but essentially it lays out the waste management hierarchy, from the most favorable at the top to the least favorable at the bottom. And as you can see, most favorable is to reduce waste at the generation level, right? Prevention, look at alternatives and availability. And as you come down that hierarchy, the one below that is reuse. So, that's wherever possible to reuse those materials. So if we are going to throw something out in the garbage, if it can be used in the second-hand market, we could sell it, or we could give it to one of the thrift stores that would recycle that material, recycle, and then, of course, we get down to the least favor, which is disposal into landfills. So that's this hierarchy is essentially where our saying reduce, reuse, recycle comes from. And reduce, reuse, recycle is essentially the waste management hierarchy. There are other simplified versions out of this that are in the form of a pyramid. They're not as busy as this one. The U.S. Environmental Protection Agency has a very basic one that essentially has the same information, but significantly abbreviated. When it comes to waste management, preventing and reducing waste generation is obviously, the first step. Is if you can avoid generating the waste in the first place, and then if you can't avoid it 100%, can you reduce the amount that you're generating? We are actually going to look at some case studies of waste prevention and reduction. Then under prevention comes reuse and preparation for reuse, right? So giving the products a second life before they become waste. And that is, as I've explained, us putting materials into the second-hand market. Many industries generate wastes that do have some value. So there are some processes out there where there are waste exchange registries in place, where a facility that's producing a waste that could be reused by someone else, they can be connected on these registries. Recycle and recovery operations. Waste materials are processed into products, materials, or substances, whether for the original or other purposes. It includes composting, but it does not include incineration. Many large electroplating facilities, they will actually recycle their wastewater treatment sludge where possible by shipping that material to the metal mining facilities located in the Sudbury area. Those facilities will process that waste back through their systems, and they will recover the metals, which are usually nickel, copper, lead, and chromium. So they will pull it back. They will pull those materials out of the sludge and put them back into their product, which is refined metals. Okay, and then obviously at the end of the scale, we have disposal, right? And disposal is it's a process of disposing of waste, be it by landfill, incineration, pyrolysis, gasification, and other finalist solutions. So, as you can see, when we dispose of something, usually that's it. That's definitely when it goes through incineration and pyrolysis, that material cannot be recovered. There are some projects going on where some of the older landfills are being mined with the purpose of trying to recover reusable materials out of the old landfills. Many of these old landfills contain a lot of metal that can be recycled and other materials that do have value. So there is some of that going on. And many mines are actually beginning to take a look at a lot of their mine tailings because as technology has improved, they can get more of the valuable metals out of their ore. So they're reprocessing some of their old ore piles to again recover additional material and reduce the overall amount of that material. So when we look at waste management companies, and this pretty well goes through waste management companies that are active in Durham region, but we have Durham Waste Management, Just Junk, Miller Waste, Wasteco, GFL Environmental. GFL, I don't know if it already is, but it's very quickly becoming the largest waste management company in Ontario. And they became that essentially through acquisitions. One of the latest acquisitions was GFL purchased Detox Environmental, who were located in Bowmanville. So these are the main players in the waste management in Durham region. But there are others that are located headquartered outside Durham region, but will come into Durham region to service industrial or commercial clients. Okay, so how is waste regulated in Ontario? Waste management is primarily the responsibility of the provincial government. Okay, waste management and recycling falls into two main areas: residential and industrial, commercial, and institutionals. Okay, residential, that is the municipal waste stream. We're not regulated such at our level. There are regulations that cover the municipal waste collection and disposal systems, but industrial, commercial, and institutional members must abide to the regulations and compliance based on size. I see industrial, commercial, and institutional businesses that are producers of products and our packaging are increasingly mandated to take physical and or financial responsibility for the waste that they produce and our packaging that they create. In that paragraph, it says it has industrial at the beginning, and then essentially says members must abide to the regulations and compliance based on size. That is not exactly the case when we get to the industrial sector. An industrial facility that is generating a waste, regardless of their size, is regulated under Regulation 347. But when we get into the commercial and institutional sector, the regulations do speak specifically to various sizes of business and what portions of the regulations become applicable to those industries based on either the amount of employees they have or the square footage of their facility. Okay, so Ontario laws affecting waste and recycling. Ontario Regulation 101/07, that's the recycling and composting of municipal waste. This is the regulation that tells municipalities of various sizes what type of recycling facilities they have to have in place and if they have to have composting in place. Regulation 102 covers waste audits and waste reduction. Regulation 103 is the industrial, commercial, and industrial source separation programs. Regulation 104 covers packaging audits, packaging reduction work plans, and Regulation 347, which is our general waste management regulation in Ontario. It covers, essentially all hazardous waste generated in the industrial sector and any hazardous waste that's generated in the ICI sector and construction and demolition. We have the Waste Free Ontario Act, Resource Recovery and Circular Economy Act, the Environmental Assessment Act, and the Planning Act. All of those regulations and acts apply in some way, shape, or form to waste. If you look at the top, we have the Environmental Protection Act, and then we have other regulations that are listed underneath that act, they're offset a little bit. That's because all of those regulations are made under the Environmental Protection Act. So when you see a regulation, that regulation is typically made under one of the acts in Ontario. So all of our waste regulations are made under the Environmental Protection Act. Okay, Regulation 347, General Waste Management, made under the EPA, applicable to all wastes. Classifies wastes based on its properties. So it can be classified as hazardous, liquid industrial, agricultural, municipal, biomass, etc. But it also exempts wastes. If you look at the regulation, there is a section very close to the beginning that says, you know, the following wastes are exempt from waste diversion. They're exempt from many of the requirements of the act, right? One of them being inert fill. So inert fill that is generated from a construction product is classified under Regulation 347 as an exempt waste. So if we're doing a remediation project, we're generating lots of waste soil, we have to be very careful if we need to ship this under Regulation 347 on a waste manifest, or if it meets the requirements of a non-hazardous material and can be disposed of outside the regulation. Okay. 3 hours regulations made under the Environmental Protection Act. 101/94, recycling and composting of municipal wastes. This regulation applies specifically to municipalities. Waste audits and waste reduction work plans. This regulation sets out the requirements for facilities, both industrial and commercial, to conduct waste audits and to develop waste reduction work plans based on the results of those waste audits. Ontario Regulation 103, it is the ICI source separation programs. So Regulation 103, it requires industrial, commercial, and industrial facilities to actually separate some of the waste that they generate. So industrial facilities, for example, they must separate cardboard waste from their waste streams, and that gets shipped off through a waste provider as a recyclable material. So they can't just throw large industrial facilities just cannot dispose of their cardboard along with their regular waste. And Regulation 104, it outlines the requirements for packaging audits and packaging reduction work plans. So companies that are producing packaging under this regulation, they're supposed to be doing packaging audits, and based on the results of that audits, they're supposed to be looking at the packaging material and seeing how they can reduce that material. Okay, a Regulation 101 requires municipalities, if they're located in Southern Ontario with a population of at least 5,000, and in Northern Ontario with a population of at least 15,000, to provide a blue box program for both single family and multi-unit dwellings. So Durham region, obviously there's more than 5,000 people in Durham region. We're in Southern Ontario. The region is required to provide a blue box program to all the residences in the municipality, and also to multi-unit dwellings, you know, which are your triplexes and apartment buildings. With a population of at least 5,000, to provide backyard composters, leaf and yard waste collection. Okay, so if that municipality has a population of 5,000, they're required to provide backyard composters. I believe if they opt not to provide backyard composters, they can develop their own centralized composting facility, which Durham region has done. It covers leaf and yard waste collection. Leaf and yard waste is inorganic materials. It enters the same composting stream as kitchen scraps and other biodegradable materials. Ontario Regulation 101 defines which materials, paper, glass, and aluminum, must be included in the Ontario Blue Box systems, and it also provides a list of optional ones. When you look at the Blue Box program in this regulation, as it says, paper, glass, and aluminum, those are materials that are fairly easily recyclable, and especially in the case of glass and aluminum, does contain some value, so they are regulated that they must be provided in the Blue Box program. Conflicts between Blue Box systems requiring materials as outlined in Ontario 101 versus optional materials. That Waste Diversion Ontario encourages collection of certain materials relative to others. Yeah, so I mean, there is some conflicts in the regulations, between what in one regulation says is an optional material and what another regulation says is required to be recycling. Municipalities across Ontario collect a variety of materials. Some collect polystyrene while others don't. Why? Although not required under Ontario Regulation 101, several municipalities have added food waste to their organics programs. Many facilities don't include polystyrene because it's not a regulated waste that must be part of the Blue Box program, and it's also it's a fairly expensive waste to recycle and to recover. So most municipalities just don't do it. It does not cover apartment and condo dwellings. Okay, Ontario Regulation 10107 incorporates the Guide to Environmental Assessment Requirements for Waste Management projects. Municipal landfill projects that cost less than 3.5 million must now follow a screening process under the Guide to the Environmental Assessment Act. Removes most waste approvals, including large incinerator in Bath, Ontario, from public notices on the environmental registry under the Environmental Bill of Rights, third-party appeals, and SEV considerations. I'm not sure if you're all aware of it. Some of you have probably taken a look at it, but public notices in Ontario must be posted on the environmental registry. This is commonly known as the Environmental Bill of Rights. So any member of the public can access the environmental registry at any time and see what notices have been posted. And based on those notices, if they feel so inclined, they are allowed to provide comment to the public agent or the public agency that has posted that notice. And public notices are generally notices that are posted associated to environmental compliance approvals. So if a company is applying for a permit to allow them to discharge contaminants to the atmosphere, there will be a notice published in the environmental registry regarding what it is they're applying for. And if a piece of legislation is to be updated, amended, or introduced, you will find notices to that effect on the environmental registry. SEV stands for Statement of Environmental Values. All ministries in Ontario are required to have a Statement of Environmental Values. There's a link on this slide that takes you to, I believe it's the Ministry of Energy's webpage, and you will be able to read their Statement of Environmental Values on that webpage. So every ministry in Ontario is required to have a statement of environmental values. There may be differences in municipal regions on what is considered recycle, what goes in the green box, blue box, etc. Peel region may have different recycle versions compared to York regions. I mean, there can be confusion as to what goes into recycling boxes between municipalities, but even within within municipalities. I know my wife usually every Sunday night, I see her with the recycling brochure from Durham Region, trying to determine what material she can and she cannot put into the recycling program. Typically, a generator of hazardous or liquid industrial waste is required to register with the provincial regulator and only transfer waste under the authority of a waste manifest. So an industrial facility in Ontario is required to register with the Ministry of the Environment under the Hazardous Waste Information Network program. Every generator that is registered is assigned a waste generator number. Every February, that industry or industrial plant has to go on that website. They have to pay the registration fee. They have to register all their wastes on in the HWIN site. Their waste manifests are tracked on the HWIN site, and there are fees for each shipment of waste. There's a manifest fee and there's a waste tonnage fee, and those fees have to be paid by no later than end of February each calendar year, or that plant cannot renew their HWIN generation. And it is an offense to ship a waste if you're not registered. Most provincial jurisdictions also have special rules for the management of polychlorinated biphenyl wastes and refrigerant wastes. I would also add to that asbestos wastes. Regulation 347 has a section that specifically deals with asbestos wastes and how those wastes are to be managed within a waste management system. Okay, most provincial jurisdictions have special rules to encourage the reduction, reuse, and recycling of waste, and most have established stewardship programs for specific recyclable materials such as tires and electrical equipment. Stewardship programs are stewardships are organizations that are formed under provincial legislation and manufacturing operations that produce materials under that stewardship group are required to be members of those stewardships, and those stewardships track the material that's being placed into production by those companies, collect fees based on that, and will be involved in the recycling of those goods. A classic example of that is tires. There is every time you go and you have to buy a new tire, you will notice that there is, I believe it's a $5 fee that must be paid for every tire that's replaced. That $5 fee is supposed to go to a stewardship organization, and they are responsible for recycling programs to ensure that those tires do not become part of a waste stream. Penalty for non-compliance with legislated waste management requirements range widely across jurisdictions in Canada and can be as high as $10 million for an offence involving hazardous wastes. Some provinces impose minimum fines of, for example, $25,000 for a first conviction. Ontario generally does not, and I'm speaking generally, they do not generally provide minimum fines for a first conviction. They will generally, in the regulations, say that you will be subject to a fine up to a certain amount for every day that the offence occurs. And you can see the wording for those fines in the Environmental Protection Act. Okay, so here are some resources for you guys to take a look at. Resource Recovery and Circular Economy Act, regulations under the Waste Diversion Transition Act, the International Zero Waste Definition and Hierarchy. So those are some areas where you can go and get some additional resources on it. What I would encourage you to do is take a look at some of the some of the things that I have pointed out in the lecture today. If you can go take a look at some of the sites, like the historical municipal disposal sites in Whitby, go take a look at some of them, research them, research some of these items online. There's lots of valuable documentation on lots of these issues. So I would encourage you, if you can find the time, to go and research some of them. Okay, so that's it for Unit 1. We have 10 minutes left. So anybody have any questions? Any question about anything? Anything we went through in the lecture? Anything about the course at all? I didn't see any hands go up. So I'm assuming you're all busy making notes and paying close attention to what I was saying. Any questions? No questions? No? Okay, I am going to try and resolve this issue of people having to go into meeting rooms or waiting rooms. I'm waiting for me to have to allow you to access the lecture. So I'll try and get that resolved by the next lecture. So if there are no questions, we are done for today. Okay, I will see some of you in a couple of hours for our outside lab. So I look forward to meeting those of you who will be there, and we will get together virtually again next Thursday for a Thursday morning lecture. Okay, thank you all very much for attending.